5, 15.
Can I just say something first? Which is, I know that Rosie's going to have a chat with me, but
You're very welcome to talk on your own. You know.
No. I just because you probably know I'm not somebody who was advertised tonight, and I got a very well put email saying we'd love you to come, and is it possible? I have to say now that Paul has turned up on crutches and with, I don't know if you all saw he had a little bag. That wasn't a man bag he had with him. That was his blood bag that he took with him up to the stage. Nobody is ever going to cancel from 5 by 15 again, so this will be the last time that you see a replacement. But the reason that I came is because I did do it once before, and it was just fantastic. And I think, as Rosie said, I've written a book on Socrates, and I'm slightly obsessed with him. And Socrates was always trying to find the good life, trying to appreciate and somehow kind of analyse what the good life was. And it seemed to me that this is Socrates' good life, when people meet together to talk and debate, plenty of wine flowing, because he loved his booze, Socrates, and if he's up there somewhere, along with Marie, looking down on us, and I'm sure...
And Dickens, and Eliot, and Austen.
Exactly, appreciating. And I think Sir Andrew Davies is the modern-day Socrates, enraged at Dickens. This is exactly what Socrates would have done. So just to say thank you to all of you for coming, because I think it's a hopeful thing that this sort of event is here in the 21st century. But anyway...
now, thank you.
That's all right.
Stick around.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, I certainly watched your programme, and I came to the end of the first part feeling enraged as to how women got so more or less totally eliminated. That's probably jumping ahead slightly with the question. I mean, why did you take this on and now, and what was behind it?
Well, so what it is, for those of you who weren't glued to your television sets on last Wednesday night on BBC Two, it's a series called Divine Women, and the idea is that it looks at the relationship between women and religion. Not an ambitious task at all, because it looks at the relationship between women and religion over 15,000 years of history and across all world faiths. But, you know, hey, we can do that in 3 hours of telly, I'm sure. But I think, it's something I'd wanted to do for years and years, and I think it's very interesting now that television is confident enough to commission it, because the truth is, up until now, if you'd suggested doing a series like this, people would have been very wary of it. They would have thought that you were an angry feminist coming with an agenda, that it was going to be off-putting. So it is very interesting, I think, that the BBC's commissioned it now. But also, I came to it really not with a feminist agenda at all, but actually just simply as a historian. That the historian's job, I think, as far as I understand it, is to fill in the gaps in history. And it seemed to me extraordinary that although women have always been 50% of the population, like it or not, we have never occupied 50% of human history. Apart from when it comes to religion and ritual, where there is an extraordinary wealth of evidence dating back not 1,000, 10,000, 20,000, but 40,000 years for this very intimate and very potent relationship between women and the divine. But that's often not talked about, and if it is talked about, it's talked about in these very kind of poppy, sacred, feminine terms. So it just seemed to me that it was really worthwhile following that line of inquiry and then uncovering a new, or not a new, but a kind of revealing what's up until now been a secret history of the world, because the evidence is there, but people haven't chosen to look at it. So it just seemed to me it was the time to try to get this evidence out on screen.
Well, you've certainly done that. I mean, one of the things that struck me a lot was how strong the feminine presence was in worship and spirituality all those many years ago, but it has disappeared. What happened?
Yeah, well, it is, it's the million-dollar question, isn't it, what happened? And I think there's probably not one single reason, although there is a pattern. And I think, how many people watched it? This is going to tell my publicist would kill me for a few of you. Okay, well, so for the few that didn't, just to explain, we start off in the first programme looking at the tradition of goddesses in human civilization. And I go to a really incredible place where you should all go if you've not visited yet, You probably haven't, because it's a secret archaeological site, which we've now completely blown their cover. But it's
There's
on
a map downstairs.
Yeah, exactly. It's called Göbekli Tepe, and it's actually on the Turkish-Syrian border. So interestingly, when we were there, Paul, we were filming, and we kept on seeing these crowds of people and thinking, what are these? God, what are these guys? Are they migrant workers? What a strange, it was October, what a strange time for all these poor-looking farmers to be travelling. And then we realised that they were refugees coming over the border, and it was just before, actually, it became an official crisis. So we did film with all these Syrians sitting around, cross-legged, watching us. And the reason that this particular place, Göbekli Tepe, is so incredible is that it's 12,000 years old. So it predates Stonehenge and the pyramids by 7,000 years. And it is the oldest religious building in the world. And what is remarkable about it is that 12,000 years ago, we hadn't settled down. So there were no towns, there were no villages, there were no cities. And yet, what it seems drew people together was the desire to have a religious experience of some kind. So we're talking about these nomad bands who clearly once a year, maybe twice a year, would come together, and they built this temple, which, go online after tonight when you get back home and have a look at it. It's remarkable. It's incredibly sophisticated. It's built with these 16-ton blocks of stone, which are carved with these very, very beautiful kind of fantastical figures and shapes, wild animals and gargoyles and kind of half men, half tree creatures. But really beautiful. If you were shown a picture of it, you would probably think it had just come off the side of a 12th century Christian cathedral. It's really remarkably sophisticated. But what is very interesting about it is the only absolutely recognizable human figure in this temple, which has been scratched into this tablet of stone, is a naked woman, sort of slightly wild-haired naked woman, who's either lying on her back or squatting, with her kind of breasts dangling either side. And I can say this because there aren't any children in the audience, I think. She's being fucked and giving birth, and I think probably menstruating at the same time. So it's kind of all going on there in this bit of Stone Age graffiti. And I knew that women were very present in early cultures when it came to religion, because if you look at all the human figurines that have been created from 1000 BC back to 40,000 BC, all the human figurines, 92% of those are of the female form. So clearly, for early societies, people thought if they had to understand what it was to be human in relation to a bigger idea about what it was to be human, they had to try to understand what it was to be female first. So there is clearly something special going on, but it is all related, I think there is no doubt, to sex and procreation, and that very graphic bit of Stone Age graffiti seems to prove it. It does, I know I'm not answering your question at all, I am just about to answer your question, but I have to say it does carry on. I only say this because I've got my 15-year-old daughter in the audience, so I can embarrass her. This kind of interesting connection with sex absolutely carries on, that's at the end of the programme. I go to visit a temple called Kamakya Temple, which is high in the Assam hills. Because, of course, I think we forget, we sort of know it intellectually, but we forget it emotionally, that there are 900 million Hindus in the world who still actively worship the goddess. For them, the goddess is alive and kicking. And in this particular temple high in the hills, it's the temple of the vagina. And my daughter said, I can't believe you, oh my God, don't tell me you're going to the temple of the vagina on telly. And I said, yes, and I'm afraid I am also going into the vagina on television, which I do, and frustratingly, the cameras weren't allowed to follow me. But I can tell you what happens inside, because you don't see it on the show. So you go into this temple. It's a very... it's a very interesting place. For anybody who's interested in the classical world, it is Athens and Rome alive and kicking, because the goddess in this particular temple demands blood sacrifice. So everybody brings goats to sacrifice to her. The poorest people from all around bring these little goats. And those who can afford it bring buffalo. So these buffalo are sacrificed to her, and they're stretched out by the priest. They're anointed, as they were in Greece and Rome, with herbs, and their horns are gilded. And then this extraordinary sacrificer, who is just like something out of a fairy tale, great beefy butcher guy, also garlanded himself, purifies himself, and then just takes off the buffalo's head with one swipe. Anyway, that's all going on above the vagina, and then when you go in, you kind of queue. It's very hot and wet, and there's a long line, mainly of men, going down there. And then at the bottom of the temple, there's a natural cleft in the rock, where this sacred spring emerges. And you bend down, and you're blessed with the waters from the sacred spring. What's interesting, why they obviously thought this was the Earth's vagina, is that once a year after the monsoons, this spring flows bright red, because the monsoons wash red oxide into the water. So they obviously thought this was a woman menstruating. Anyway, I completely digress. But and you can't see any of that on telly, because we weren't allowed to film it. But it is interesting how this very kind of tenacious connection between birth and life-giving and sex. So to answer your question, eventually, but we had our 15 minutes here. Why it goes? Because that is, for the bulk of the human experience, there is no doubt that it was, the goddess and her high priestesses ran religion. And I think there are two things that happen. In the Bronze Age, round about 1600 BC, I have to say, I love men. So please stop me if I'm sounding anti-bloke, which I'm completely not, but the archaeology is quite interesting here, is that around 1600 BC, basically, civilization gets very greedy. So you have these beautiful citadels full of these Bronze Age warriors. It's where all the stories, the Homer's Iliad, all these amazing tales of myths, I think, really generate in this period. You have these beautiful citadels. Populations have stabilized, so goddesses no longer need to be worshipped, women no longer need to be adored, because actually the societies have got sufficiently big that they're not going to die out, and that this was the problem up until then, which is why women, as these kind of, the birthing creatures, I think had such power. And then people sit in their beautiful citadels and they look out over the horizon and they think, well, we've got a great life, but we also fancy a bit of what they've got. And it's when you get this very aggressive, militaristic culture developing. And what you see in the archaeology is two things. Up until then, people are dying generally of natural causes. From about 1600 BC, the bulk of men are dying because of battle wounds. So their skeletons are absolutely ravaged with axe marks, with sword slices on their arms, they have arrows through their heads. I mean, the sort of terrible thing is you find these skulls where men have obviously gone out to fort and they've had an arrow go right through their skull, and it's just been broken off, and that's not what they've died of. They've been sent back out to fight, and it's something else that has killed them. And at this time in the Bronze Age, what you also then get is the birth, for the very first time, of a single all-powerful warrior god. So this is when Zeus first appears, for instance. And Zeus starts off rather sweetly as these tiny little sort of kind of belligerent boy figurines about that big in Asia Minor. He's got his fist raised, looking very cross. And then he gets bigger and bigger. And that's when there is this kind of quantum shift in society. So suddenly you get a very different thing. And I don't want to give the impression at all, because I think this is a complete false history, that before the arrival of Zeus, there was this kind of rather benign, wonderful, matriarchal, peaceful culture, because that's complete bollocks. It was a very tough world. It was a world, a very high-octane world, and if you look at how the goddesses are described, they aren't described in bountiful terms. They're also described themselves as bringers of death. There's this fantastic poem written by the first named author in the history of the world, who's a priestess of the goddess Inanna, and she describes Inanna as arriving blazing with fire, blazing with death, blazing with red firepower on her blazing chariot. So, you know, they aren't these kind of welcoming, cozy mother goddess figures that some would like us to think were there at all. So it is a very harsh world, but there is something that changes, as I said, in the Bronze Age, and suddenly you get this new kind of hierarchy where there is one single male god who's in charge of the rest.
We haven't got very much longer, so I'm going to ask you. I'm going to ask you a completely impossible question to answer in a very short time, and then we'll have to stop. But how did, in the Christian thing, how did God become male?
Yeah, well, there we are.
I think we'll end now.
I know, off we go.
1 minute on how God became
male. Well, I had to say, I was on a talk show with the rabbi yesterday morning, and we asked exactly the same question. The rabbi said, well, the reason is, you see, the man is the giver of life, and the woman is the receiver of life, and this is why God is male. And we all went, oh, how do we deal with that on live telly? I think if, very interestingly, if you look at the Hebrew Bible, God is only described as Father 12 times in all of the Hebrew Bible, but those are the passages that we remember. So actually, in monotheism, God originally doesn't start as male. God has a consort, and he's often described in very female terms. But again, I think there is a change then with actually, you know, again, I love the Romans, but I do lay the blame at the Romans' door. Once Christianity becomes the official religion of the Roman Empire in the 4th century AD, suddenly Christianity changes from being this very, very radical cult where Paul, again, people always blame Paul for being anti-women, and he's not at all. He says there is neither male nor female. Where Christianity changes from this very embracing culture, where controversially next week on the telly programme I talk about the female priests and bishops in the early church. So this is probably the last time you see me living and breathing, so, you know, enjoy it. And that all changes, I think, when Christianity becomes the official religion of the Roman Empire, because suddenly the interesting thing is that Christianity goes from being an idea to being a faith with a massive territory that it has to defend. And so Christianity suddenly has garrisons, it has the empire who's also the head of the army, and the foot soldiers of Christ become much more important than the handmaidens of Christ.
And so it has remained.
And so it has remained. There's going to be a vote in July, so who knows what's going to happen then. But yes, it's certainly an interesting. I think, as you asked, the original question was why make this series. I think it was just to point out really that for the bulk of human experience, women have been on top in religious terms. So maybe that's gonna happen again. Can I do a Babylonian toast to the end?
Yeah,
are we at the end of our thing?
Yeah.
Just this is. People always say to me, oh, you know, those early societies, but they were so kind of brutish, and, you know, it was a part of very barbaric, primitive culture when goddesses were in charge. And I would just like to say that when men and women used to meet in very similar numbers to this together so that they could make collective decisions about how life was run, they would raise their glasses and make a toast to one another 4,000, 5,000 years ago. So I wonder if we could do that this evening. So if you've got anything left in your glass and you're feeling pagan, then raise it. And the toast they would make to one another in ancient Babylon, it was Anashulmi u Balatu, which means to peace, to life, and to love. And that seems a pretty good toast to me. Anashulmi u Balatu.